Should you use the same arrows and the same setup for your indoor season as you would for your outdoor season? I get this question a lot. I'm sure Coach Ash Morgan does as well. So today we want to get into that, dig down and try and answer that question. Of course, we're looking at this from a target archery point of view, where you're probably spending the winter shooting at 18 meters at a triple spot face. And then in the summer, we're outside as a compound at 50 meters or a recurve at 70 meters. So Ash, what's your initial thoughts on this? Because I think yours are different to mine.
Yeah, this will be good. So my initial kind of reaction to that is, no, most people should probably just shoot the same thin arrow indoors and outdoors. But then when I kind of think about that more, so the reason I say that is because I did that most of my career, and I don't think there's a massive difference between score-wise indoor, shooting thick arrows versus thin arrows for a lot of people. I think the difference is fairly small. However, when I then say that, the reason that I did that my whole career is, if I'm honest, yes, I was going to Nîmes in January and Vegas in February and that kind of thing, but really I cared more about the outdoor stuff. Like, it was always about 70 meters. So I didn't want to have to move my arrow rest out, change my center shot for thick arrows, change your whole setup, and then not be able to shoot 70 meters for 3 or 4 months. I always wanted to be able to maybe shoot an 18-meter session, and then in the afternoon maybe shoot a 70-meter 720 or something like that. So I guess my initial answer is no. But if you really are trying to maximize the indoor, I think maybe this is your kind of approach, what you did, right?
Is your shooting progressing as you like, or would you like some expert coaching from a friendly face? If so, the details are in the description. Now back to the video. Yes, for me, if you truly want to try and be world class at both, for me and the way I shot in both compound and recurve, there's just no question. I absolutely want to have an indoor setup with big fat aluminium 2314 X7 arrows, or whatever. What are they called now? They're called X23s. It's the same arrow for many years, but they keep changing the name and the color. But we'll cover compound in a little bit. But as a recurve archer, to me, the difference in scores was going from mid 580 to low 590s. Now, yes, that might only be 5, 6, 7 points, but obviously
quite a big difference.
At the World Championships, I don't believe I would have ever qualified first at the World Indoor unless I was shooting those aluminium arrows. I got 591. I think I had someone behind me with 590, 2 people on 589. I think I would have been down in 8th or 9th if I'd have shot 585, because there's a lot of people out there who can shoot 585. There's a lot less people who can shoot 590 plus. So for me, and maybe I want to say my style of shooting, because I do appreciate that it's I think shooting the aluminium slower arrow, I think it does make your shooting go in one sort of direction, which can be a negative. Yeah. From your point of view, I think if you spent the whole 6 months of the winter shooting aluminium arrows, even if you had another X10 bow waiting to go, I don't know if shooting those big, heavy, slow arrows, I believe it would change your shooting over the winter.
I hadn't thought about that before. Yeah.
And that was more the coaches who, I'll confess here, on my final year of indoor shooting, when I was leading up to the London Olympics selection shoot, I didn't shoot aluminiums because it was clear to me nothing mattered that indoor season apart from doing my best performance at the team selection shoot. And the coach's points of view at that time was less about their equipment, because at that time I had 2 bows. Because if you've only got one main bow, it does take a lot of messing around. It's a good few days of changing things and trying to find your place. But they were worried about how it affected my shooting. And they thought 6 months shooting aluminium arrows indoors, big heavy points, big old fletchings, they thought that was going to affect my shooting. Now, you dabbled with the aluminium arrows, didn't you? You did try. Yeah. But so you never felt like it was changing your shooting. For you, it was more of a physical bow thing, was it?
Yeah, there were two kind of issues I had with it, I guess. I think one was really that my poundage wasn't in the place where I could maximize the thick arrows, so I couldn't actually get arrows that were that thick anyway. So if I wanted a real...
you're getting less in return, aren't you? You're getting less for the sacrifice you're making, yeah.
Yeah, So essentially, I would either have to shoot, say, if I wanted to shoot 23-14s, they would be so out of tune that they're not forgiving. If I then shot an arrow that was in tune, it wouldn't be that thick. But the other thing, I've never thought about that before, but what you mentioned with the shot feeling essentially is I'm not a big fan of that a bit more dead, softer thunk of the shot feeling that you were mentioning. And that's really interesting. It's quite different.
Yes.
And it kind of reminded me when you were saying that. I'd never put two and two together before, but in the same way that some people really like a back heavy stabilizer setup and they like that a little bit more dead, it suits their shot style a little bit more, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. That actually makes sense now, because when I think about the people indoors that tend to do really well with the thick arrows as well, maybe like Brady, maybe I think Ojin Heks, not sure if he's shot thick arrows actually, but when I think of those sorts of people, a lot of them tend to be a little bit more back heavy stabilizers, heavy mass weight setups, and they tend to prefer that feeling. But then when you look at some of the Koreans do a bit more indoors, especially the women's Korean like company teams that come to Nîmes and Vegas, super snappy shots, all of that, super aggressive bow roll, that kind of shot feeling that I used to like, then you'll see them typically sticking with the thin arrows. So I'd never actually put that together, but I think that's a really important point for people to think about.
Hit on something there, because those heavy bows, the neutral balance bows, they're all favoring a bow geared up to aim well. And that's what I liked. And that was the strongest point of my technique. And that delivers the biggest reward outside. And you can take that same shot and take it outside, and it doesn't perform at 70 meters.
Yeah.
So I think what you're saying there, I can understand that. And also, if you think it's a personal thing as well, isn't it? If I've had a summer season where I haven't been a superstar and I haven't set the world on fire, but I know if I put my time and effort into setting up an indoor bow, I can win international world-class medals. Well, no wonder I do that, because I can then spend the indoor season boosting up my self-image, and I've got something to take away from it. Whereas if you're not that focused on it, and it's the difference between finishing 20th or finishing in 15th, well, it probably isn't worth the sacrifice. But I love, if I think of the happiest I've ever been with a recurve bow, that it is shooting those big fat arrows indoors, just thumping the middle of the 10.
Yeah.
And that's my best feelings I've had, and it just suits my style, or maybe I was just good at it, so then you reinforce that feeling of success. So I want to be clear that, so when we're talking about predominantly shooting X10s outside and indoors, I would have to go on to one of the aluminium arrows, like a 23-14, have it cut to the full length I can, but not using any special long sight extender clicker, just having a clicker right on the front of my bow, and probably putting in a 200 grain point, maybe a 250. So none of the scenarios where I'm loading it up with 400 grains and having the clicker halfway down my sight, because we do see people doing that, even successfully. I mean, I'm pretty sure a few years back I watched Jake Kaminsky. I want to say maybe he got the silver medal at Vegas, and he was shooting 27-12s. Or are they 27?
Because it's Vegas. You're allowed,
it's Vegas. He's shooting the maximum size arrow. I can't remember if it's 27-12 or 27-11. He was shooting those arrows, big, long, pin-sharp points. I can't swear. I seem to remember they were in 300 grains, but I could be wrong on that. But he had them extra long, because to get that to work, even with him, I'm sure, shooting 50-plus pounds, you require having your clicker halfway down your sight. And he delivered a world-class performance, and I never quite went that far, because most of my shoots are World Archery, not Vegas, so I geared up with the 23, and I could make a 23-14 work for me. Long draw length, 53 pounds, but some people do take it that extra extreme.
That extra bit, yeah. And I think the other thing that's interesting is when I've spoken to you before about this as well, you found those arrows, the thick arrows, and that setup really forgiving. And I think this is the key thing that people, if they're going to test it out, if you're not sure, it's definitely worth, if you're not sure for the indoor season, it's definitely worth testing it. But the thing that you want to look at is the forgiveness, because you found it actually really forgiving to shoot, didn't you?
Yes, I did. I felt like the type of mistake I made, which is a type of mistake where I'm a little bit slower, I've lost my dynamicness and my release has gone down the drain. Yeah, I could do a poor release and still hit the side of the 10. And that was, so for my style of shooting and my style of mistakes, it was definitely more forgiving, for sure.
And I've seen people that have said the opposite, because I don't know exactly what the reason is, but I've seen people that could tune them, like poundage wise, length wise, they could tune them, and they've shot them indoors and they've said that they're really unforgiving. And I honestly, I don't know why that is. Some people find that or not.
We know that we have different styles and we have different weaknesses. And for me, with a weakness in the release, it's definitely the way to go. But that probably doesn't give me a head start on next outdoor season. So I did pay a price for it. But I also, they're some of the best archery memories of my life. So I'm not crying about it. You know,
No.
it's fun.
And as someone that shoots, I have to say this as well, as someone that shoots thin arrows, nothing quite
I know what you're going to say.
upsets your opponent. Like I'll shoot an end, head to head in Nîmes or something. I've done this before, multiple times in Nîmes or Vegas or whatever it is. I'll shoot 3 arrows and I'm like, okay, I got 3 10s there. They were good shots, 3 good shots. Pretty sure they're 3 10s. I'll get down and I've got like, an inside out 10, maybe an X, another X, and then it's just missed the 10 line, it's a 9. And I've thought my opponent's got 28. They've got 10 9 9, massively not in the middle. And I get down, I've got 29, they've got 30. And now I'm like, what the hell? I thought I was like 4-0 up in this head-to-head. Now it's like 2-2 or whatever it is. And you're just like, what on earth? Because you see these thick arrows in the target.
There is a psychological game there as well. I would say if they scored the same, I would, from a psychological point of view, I would use the big arrows, because a number of times I've had, not pointing the finger at you, Ash, but people whinging, oh, you can't miss with those arrows. And I'd be like, yeah, that's how it really feels. I feel like I can't miss. I would really pile it on because, yeah, you're definitely a disadvantage. Yeah, you probably shot better than me, but I beat you by 2 points.
That's brilliant. Yeah. Who's going to see that on the scorecard, right? It's like...
Absolutely. Yeah. There's no bracket on the scoreboard that says number 1, brackets, yeah, but he used big arrows,
Yeah. Oh,
and I guess we could throw a budgetary thing in there that the aluminium arrows are relatively cheap. You can buy just 4 of them. If you want to give them a go, you haven't got to go and spend $500 on a dozen of them. You can just go and buy 4 of them, give them a go, see if they work. And if they do work, well, buy yourself some more. But on the 3-spot face, really, for competitions, I know a scenario where I've used the same 3 arrows for all of my competitions indoors, especially when I'm shooting at foam targets. No issue at all. And unless you want more arrows for training, which obviously I would have done, but you can get away with just having 6 of them, 8 of them. You're not required to have piles of them and then make a big investment. You can just treat it as a fun experience, something different to experiment with and learn with over the weekend, just over the winter, just to mix things up.
Yeah. And I have tried, for anyone wondering as well, putting thick or big feather fletchings on X10s one time. I was like, maybe this is a genius idea, because of a lot of the stability you get from the big fletches and the big feathers. Big
feathers, I really love them. They add so much drag, so much stability, and if they hit anything, they generally fold out of the way.
Yeah. And I tried those on X10s, but the thing I didn't realize is they're so big that they barely fit on the shaft, first of all, when you're gluing them on.
Yeah, I bet.
And then when they did, they were so long and there was so much glue that they actually stiffened the whole back of the arrow up massively. And I wish I had a high-speed video of this, but basically I've not seen clearance that bad pretty much ever. But basically they were just slamming into the bow because the whole back of the X10 was basically not barreled anymore. It's probably the reverse of barrel.
That is a really interesting way of looking at it. Yeah, I've never thought of that. And I want to say, you didn't have a crazy idea there. Someone who was a real indoor specialist in the 90s and going well into the 2000s was Magnus Pettersson of Sweden. Yeah. And he won the World Indoor Championships 2 times. Once with big arrows with big feathers, big aluminiums with big feathers. And then the next time he won it with X10s with big feathers. Okay. So you were in good company. And again, I think for him it was an Olympic year. His country was having a relatively early selection, I believe, or maybe it was a world championship. But there was a reason why he wanted to keep that feeling. So again, he wasn't making that decision. He wasn't saying,
On
"Oh,
performance.
these small X10s are scoring more points." It was, "I want to keep my feeling because I have to deliver outside relatively a few weeks after this indoor tournament." But he got
Yeah.
2 world championships with 2 different arrows, but he had the same fletchings on both.
That's interesting. And for someone, I guess, something I forgot to say earlier is if someone's going to test this and then they're seeing, like, when we say about being forgiving, I should say, for me, 2 things that I'd always look for if I'm looking if something's forgiving or not is how the scorecard looks in terms of, is it just 10, 10, 10, 10, 8, 7? Because that doesn't indicate a forgiving setup.
That's definitely an extreme example, but yes.
Yeah. So that's kind of a big example. And then the other example, this will vary depending on your skill level. But for example, for the X10s, when I put the feathers on, what I noticed with those is the score was a little bit lower than normal, but there was just a hole. There was almost like a hole in the X when I plotted the arrows. It's like basically I was just clipping then this was in practice, bear in mind, this wasn't even competition, but just clipping the 10. And there was basically, when I looked at my scorecards with a well-tuned arrow versus that badly tuned one, there were almost non-existent X's. It was like I just couldn't shoot X's, even though I was shooting the same technique and the same arrow. So definitely plot your arrows and score them and kind of look. Maybe it's not X's, but maybe, for example, if you normally shoot everything within the gold and you suddenly see your 10 count as halved, then maybe something is a bit less forgiving with that. Was there any things kind of you looked at when you were, for example, shooting those thick arrows versus thin ones for forgiveness?
For me, it was just, even my worst shots were within the gold. And then I remembered when I did shoot that 591 at the World Championships, one end, I had 998.
Oh no!
Can you believe that? I only dropped 9 points in their entire qualifying round, and I managed to do 4 of them in one end.
But
my team manager at the time, he said he nearly died because I was in first place. I didn't know because I wasn't looking and no one was calling it out, and I went from first, and then I dropped down, and then I think I cleaned. That was like the beginning of the second half. Yeah, maybe I shouldn't have gone to the toilet. Maybe I should have stayed on the shooting range.
But maybe you dropped 4 in one end, but the recovery from that end is...
Recovery was solid, absolutely. Yeah. So for me, it was more about, I just shot more 9s because most of my arrows, the majority of my arrows go in the 10. So for me, it was just, I'd have those slightly, I'd done a bad shot, but they were always 9s when I'd done a bad shot, as opposed to doing a slightly flaky shot and still being able to clip the side of the 10.
Yeah, that makes sense.
If you stayed till the end because you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing. It really helps me.